God's attributes. He will be the person that's going to be responsible for generations to come, long after Abraham is gone, of teaching new generations who God is and how to live according to God's will, how to be righteous, and how to walk in God's ways. It's a huge responsibility. And to be able to do that, God has got to confide this in Abraham. Make sense? It's important for Abraham to know what righteousness and justice are all about. And then he goes on, right? And especially if Abram's going to be the father of these great nations, right? You need to know how great your God is. And then in 20, it says, then the Lord said, how great is the outcry. And there's a lot of different interpretations, right, for what this outcry means, right? There's a lot of different scholars who will say different things, right? Is it what we know is it's like a lament, right? The word is used in a lot of prophecies when they talk about injustice and people are crying out because the injustice is so overwhelming and oppressive. It is more of a lament than a shriek, right? It doesn't mean people are shrieking. It means that people are lamenting, right? It's a personification of the sin that's infecting this city, right? That the city is crying out for justice, that the city is pleading for justice, lamenting for justice, because it's just not there. Humanity has been so degraded and without conscience that there's this lament rising up from it, right? Again, outcry, this use of outcry, very, very popular in prophecies. We also saw it in another piece of Genesis. Do you remember what it was? So remember when Cain kills Abel and God confronts him and he says, it was the blood of your brother was crying out. It is a lament for justice. I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. That's a huge statement, right? Again, attributing to God this like anthropomorphic qualities of a person coming down, right? Elevated on this high peak with Abraham and looking over this. And God is now going to descend down, right? This also happened in Genesis. Do you remember when? In Babel, right? At the Tower of Babel, God descends down, comes from heaven to see what in the world is going on. And so God says to, I must go down there. I must go down and see if that outcry, right, lines up to what's happening. How does that sit with everybody? What does that mean?
Well, it's an interesting question then. In what form does God come down?
It doesn't tell us, does it?
No, it's interesting. I never thought of Jesus becoming incarnate and becoming human, but I guess that's not what this is saying. It's God is here, but in the form of God.
Yeah, right.
Whatever that might be.
Yeah, right. Because it is sort of like the incarnation, but it's not, right?
It's not, yeah.
But what would it mean theologically? I mean, if we don't look at it as an actual descent, right? An actual physical descent. What would it? Or we could, right? Because God is certainly in a human form here.
I don't know.
What would?
I mean, then he's interacting in some degree with. He's not a remote God. He's present, I guess, in some form. Interacting with us. I mean, is that different than other formulations of God? I don't know.
In what way, John?
I don't know. I was just thinking, thinking how is God, the true
Mhm.
God,
Mhm.
differentiated from things like the Romans or Greeks gods. I mean, they
Mhm.
interacted with the Romans too, big time, had
Mhm.
children
They
with them
did.
and stuff. um, so I was trying to figure out what. So I thought I always thought there was a distinction. God, true God, the God of the Old Testament and New Testament is not like all those other
Mhm.
gods, but
Mhm.
and yet here he is also coming to Earth and
Mhm.
having, I guess, some kind of interaction.
Mhm. Having a relationship, right? He's in relationship with Abraham, which is something that the Greek and Roman gods wouldn't have never done. Humans were there for their benefit, right? Much different than those gods. This is a God who's in relationship. But it tells us here, right? It tells us here that God is going to make a personal assessment of what he's heard, right? He's not going to just arbitrarily destroy this place. He's going to make an assessment. He's going to judge if this is accurate knowledge, if this outcry really um, is for real, right? He's not going to just allow emotion to move him. He's not going to just judge on the basis of hearing, but God is going to make a direct assessment and a personal assessment, right? This is your theology that God is going to assess before judging. Does that change perspectives about God?
Well,
Not
again,
going to.
I would think of it. I mean, it seems to me that's godlike. And I suppose, not to extend the metaphor really beyond its weight, any weight it can carry. Again, unlike other gods, pagan
Hmm.
gods, Greek gods, who would toy with humans, and
Hmm.
they would be cavalier or whatever, uncaring, motivated apparently as much by their whim as anything else.
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And if something dissatisfied them, right, would be quick to wipe humanity out. This is a God who is not going to make a judgment based on emotions, based on whim, based by self-centeredness, whatever, right? God is going to personally assess this. So that whatever the judgment is based on fact, right? God is going to assess this. He's not going to work on a whim. And I must go to down. Okay. So the men turned from there and went towards Sodom, right? So now it's just God and Abraham. While Abraham remains standing before the Lord, capital, right? Yahweh. Then Abraham came near. These are words that are used, means close proximity, right? It was words that were used in the Torah when we describe priests that are approaching God or the altar, right? Abraham comes near him and he starts to ask these questions. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And then he throws out these numbers, right? Suppose there are 50. The numbers are incidental, right? The numbers are incidental. What's important here is that God isn't looking to condemn, but God is looking for salvation, right? God isn't in this for damnation. God is in this to save, right? Numbers numbers don't mean anything in this. It is showing that God's willingness to save for the sake of one person, right? This is Abraham talking to him. But in the end, and we will probably close for the night because I want you to really take this in, right? In the end, we're going to see that while Abraham looks like he's the one leading the conversation, it really is not. It's God, right? And we know that because at the end of this, right, it says when the Lord was finished speaking, right, he needed to bring Abraham on board with this so that Abraham would understand that he wasn't this vindictive God that was out to kill them all, right? And this is really important for a couple reasons. Um, which is probably too much to go into tonight. It's actually a critique of what we'll see happen in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? This religious belief that God is out for us. And this is really a critique of that understanding. That no, God really is not. God is willing to save. God is willing to go to the limits to save us. It is not God's first thought of hell and brimstone, right? God doesn't go there. God shows Abraham, I'm willing to save. But the point being, in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he does, and let me say that God does, right? He does save Lot's family, assuming that was the righteousness that was left in Sodom, right? God does, but it's more to bring Abram to God's way of thinking, to show Abraham who God really is. More to show us who God really is. Again, theology. I will say also I will say just a couple things because here it gets a little bit heavy, and I would like to talk about that next week when we're a little fresher. But it gets into the idea that Hebrew culture has Judaism has this thought of the corporate nature, right, of Hebrew culture. That one person, right, one person's sin can becomes the consequence for everyone, right? We saw this with Adam and Eve. Well, Adam and Eve sinned, right? And so all of creation was sort of like under this curse of sin, right? We see this in some of our prophecies, but we certainly see it in our theological basis, right? In Isaiah, when he talks about a substitutionary atonement of, that this one person is going to die for the sins of others, right? We see this in theories about the crucifixion, that one man is able to die for the salvation of all, and that is the part of the corporate nature of Hebrew culture, right? And that is found here in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It reflects that corporate nature. But what God is saying here is that's not really it, right? God is out to save people, not to kill them all because one person has sinned, right? And we see that also in the crucifixion. It's carried through the crucifixion. Humanity is given the opportunity to be saved through the death of one person. Like that sin doesn't wipe us all out. Questions, comments? Does this make a little bit of sense? It might make a little more sense when you marinate it this week. But, right, because that is really heavy, and it's really not the way we're used to looking at this. It's going to take you a little while to sit on this, to understand, right, where God is in this. Because honestly, this is really not what you think of when you think about the Abraham narrative, right? It is really not what you think about when you talk about Israel. And Israel talks about this loving, present God. This is much different. And a lot of scholars will say this was really written to counter, what we're going to see in that writing of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is way out of balance of what Judaism teaches about God. And so this chapter 18 was written to counter a lot of what's said in 19. This is not a vindictive God. This is a God who took everything into consideration. This is a God who did rescue whatever righteous element was left in Sodom. And this word sweep away, right? We tend to think of this as annihilation, but what it's really saying is that, this is something that has become totally useless to God. It's irredeemable, right? It's very much like the flood. What's left in humanity can't be redeemed. It's gone that bad. There's no hope in this. And it cannot be of use to God because it's that depraved, which we will see in the beginning of 19, right? Questions, comments about this?
Yeah, it's challenging on many levels.
It's challenging, Nancy, yeah. But on many levels too, it's reassuring, right?
Yes.
It should be.
Yes. Yes.
It should be, right? I mean, because the way we're taught this story, it's sort of like, well, God says, well, to hell with the 9 of them. Like to hell with the one if 9 are beyond redemption, right? To hell with that
Right.
one. That is not what this text is saying.
No.
This text is saying that
Very
God
clearly
has evaluated this.
Yeah.
And is still willing to save, right?
Yeah.
Even if there's one, God is willing to save. But needs to bring Abraham along to show that to Abraham, right? This dialogue between Abraham and God is actually leading Abraham in this dialogue, right? So that Abraham can come to that knowledge. That this is not a vindictive God, like this is going to happen, but this isn't a God that's taking this lightly. It's vindictive. This just means there's no redemption here. And it's important for Abraham to see that, and it is important for us to see it as well.
Yeah.
Because it becomes easy when we read the Hebrew Bible to think that this God doesn't line up with the Father of Christ. Right? Because this is this vindictive God. So it is really important for us both to understand that that's not the case. Questions, comments? Does this make sense?
It all does in various ways.
Again, marinate this week.
Okay.
Um,
I'm on it.
yeah, I know you all are. This text should challenge that very scary God that a lot of denominations have instilled in people falsely. And, hopefully some of our friends who have had that terrible experience will watch on YouTube, and it gives us a much more loving picture of God, which is what theology is meant to do. You can always reach out to me with questions or concerns.
Yes, we can. Thank
Do
you.
we have any of them for the rest of the night, or are we good to go?
Oh no, I'm
Good.
That's
marinating.
enough.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between marinating and stewing? It's like
Ever get you there?
Processing.
Whoever get you there, Lydia. If stewing gets you there, it's okay to turn up the heat. Yeah.
I'll let you know, Lydia.
Okay.
God turns up the heat. Yeah. I mean, our faith turns up the heat on us. And sometimes we have to, that's very prophetic, right? And here I am yapping still. It's very prophetic, right? Because we read about, going through the fire to refine the impurities, right? That's very, very prophetic.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we got to go through the fire to get that impurity out. This is one of those times. And that's okay.
Thank you.
You guys have a good night, and I will see
You
you
too.
next week.
Thank you.
In
Thank you
Sodom.
very much.
Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Good night,
right,
everyone.
bye now.
Good
God bless.
night.